Welcome back, and it's segment number 2. I'm Jennifer Fierro, your broad podcaster here in the Highland Lakes with Art Dlugach, the voice of the Llano Yellow Jackets. And as promised, we're going to talk a little bit of the NCAA Women's College World Series that concluded last week between the University of Texas and the University of Oklahoma, the Red River rivalry, if you will, on the softball field.
I called it OU weekend. Not exactly during a weekend, but it passes.
Well,
not as good as Red River rivalry, though.
Well, you and I are biased. We watched football, grew up, and you especially, watching football in the great state of Texas, have watched much, much more of it. But I also think that we have some strong opinions about softball. And in a lot of ways, I think the softball in the Big 12 especially made a statement. Much like we talked about on a smaller scale with the baseball College World Series, those final 4 teams, 3 of them came from the Big 12. 3 of them. So I think there's an argument to be made, and I did write this on TexasChalkTalk.com. My very first professional job out of college, I took a job in Artesia, New Mexico. And Artesia, New Mexico is to high schools in New Mexico what Lake Travis and Westlake are to Texas high schools here in the state of Texas, especially public high schools. It's not quite what Burnett has in that over there, you only have to win 4 playoff games, at least at that time, to be a state champion. Here, you've got to win about 6.
Yes.
So, and that's pretty consistent in just about every sport. With that said, though, at that time, softball in New Mexico was much ahead of Texas high school softball. My second job was in Sholo, Arizona, and I noticed the same thing. Arizona softball was ahead of Texas softball when it came to high schools. And at that time, Texas was starting to implement the high school programs in the state, whereas New Mexico and Arizona had softball for a number of years in the high school level. That's why you see so many of the UCLA softball program and the Pac-12 in the mid-90s, I thought was the premier softball conference in the country. I don't know that I share that opinion anymore, and he's going to tell you why when it comes to the University of Oklahoma and everything that they have that makes them what I consider to be the greatest team of all time in that sport in the NCAA.
Well, I just think I don't watch as much softball as Jennifer does, but I have the last 8 or 10 years and seen Oklahoma doing so well. But I can't imagine a better team than this year. As I mentioned in the last segment, something like a 60-3 record, and lost a game to UCLA, so they were in an elimination game, and won the next 2. One of them by the score of 15-0. Then was able to beat Texas in the finals 16-1 and 10-5, and it was 10-2 until the last inning. And Jocelyn Alo, just maybe the greatest home run hitter ever in the history of the sport. So it was just a team to be believed, I'll tell you, and great. If you're watching, if you're not a Texas fan, that's for sure.
Well, part of why I think OU was so great is because I did not see a weakness. Anytime they played this year, if their pitching was off just a hair, they had enough hot batters to offset that, and they could beat you in a number of ways. They could outscore you when it came to playing runs. If they struggled at the plate, they had a pitching staff that was strong enough to give their hitters an opportunity to play just enough runs to get a win. They also played tremendous defense, and I remember hearing that and seeing a little bit of that in the second game where it was a 10-5 loss by Texas, but there were about 2 or 3 hits or 2 or 3 balls that were in the outfield that against another team probably dropped for a hit and put Texas on base or score some runs. OU had enough speed to get under those balls and made some incredible catches to rob some of the Texas hitters from base hits. And when you can play defense like that, have great pitching, and then you have hot hitters who can manufacture runs, that is a recipe for disaster if you are the opposing team. I think back to the great Cat Osterman years at Texas. There was not a more dominant pitcher, in my opinion. Now, Lisa Fernandez and Jenny Finch can argue that, because I also grew up watching them play, especially when it came to the Olympics. When the Olympics were, when softball was adopted by the Olympics, that's really when I started to get really interested in '96 during the Atlanta games. But at the same time, though, I honestly believe that if Cat had the run support that this 2022 team gave these pitchers, I think Cat would have won more. She would have won multiple World Series championships.
Well, here's something you're going to love about Oklahoma that I saw like 2 days ago on ESPN. That the beautiful transfer portal, they have acquired the University of Michigan Pitcher of the Year from 2021, who is transferring to Oklahoma, as if the Sooners need anything else.
We will see what happens in 2023. Of course, the bar is set for the University of Oklahoma, and Texas fans are pretty curious about what Mike White will do and follow up next season.
Let me just clarify. The 2021 Big Ten Pitcher of the Year.
Okay, all right. You want to talk a little bit about the NBA Finals? Do you have a lot to say on that?
Sure. Well, not a lot, but I could say a little.
Okay,
for sure.
Go ahead.
Well, Warriors are up 3-2 after winning the last 2 games. Steph Curry scores 43 points in the big game 4, which was played in Boston at the TD Garden. Then Curry comes back and duplicates that. He goes 0 for 9 from three-point range, something like 4 years since he has not hit at least one three-pointer in the game. But Andrew Wiggins, former Kansas star, has a super game, and the Warriors win it by 10, 104-94. So they are up 3-2, playing tomorrow night, Thursday night, Game 6 in Boston. And the Warriors, from what I read, are not the favorites to win that game because Boston with the home court advantage. But when you give them the possibility of winning just 1 out of 2, the second one being in San Francisco, they are the favorites to be the champions for the 4th time in 8 years.
And to me, that is a San Antonio Spurs stat, right? Didn't the Spurs win 4 and 8?
Well, that sounds right. 99 through 07, so I guess technically it'd be 9.
Okay.
But you're right, and won 5 altogether.
And where Kobe won 5 with the Lakers, is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Won 3, and then he won 2, 09 and 10.
Okay. So, where would you put Steph Curry, and I'll let you pick, in terms of three-point shooters or in terms of one of the best of all time? Do you have an opinion on where you would put Curry?
He's one of the best of all time. I'm not saying he was better than Tim Duncan or Kobe or Magic or LeBron or Michael, but he's up there quite high. They say he's the best three-point shooter of all time because he holds the record for career three-pointers, and that will just grow because he's got about 3 more years to play. He also has a green light. Wherever he is, he can shoot that 3.
So, do you agree that he's the greatest three-point shooter of all time? Do you have an opinion on that?
He is, when you consider the number, for sure. Now, if you want to take it down a notch to who's the best percentage-wise, he may not be. But they're considering him now. They call him the greatest shooter ever.
Well,
and that's mainly because from long range.
Okay, because Bird was thought of as a great three-point shooter, but the implementation of the three-point line didn't happen until the '80s, correct?
Right.
So, and I don't know enough history of the NBA. Have you maybe Pete Maravich? Who would you compare Curry to?
Well, Maravich is an interesting question. The great LSU star died at an early age, but there was no three-point line then. If there had been, or if some great computer whiz could go back and take every one of his games and set it on their computer screen and figure, well, that was a three and this was not, but these two were, then maybe he would have been. Very, very possibly he could have been the greatest three-point shooter, but there wasn't any in his era.
Yeah.
Or if it was late.
Well, I do think that one of the things that separates Curry in this part, I do agree with you on. The green light to shoot from any distance, anywhere on the court with Curry, and his ability to make those shots. Because his standard during the offseason is that he has to make 300 long-range shots a day. Not attempt, make. He only counts as makes, and it's 300 a day during the offseason. Only great champions, only the greatest athletes in their sport set standards like that. And it's well-deserved with Curry. I don't know that I've ever seen a three-point shooter in my life like him. I used to watch a lot of Larry Bird. Thought Larry Bird was great at the three as well.
I'd like to say one thing, too, about the percentage that I mentioned. He is oftentimes double-teamed, and he'll still take the three. Well, obviously, it's harder to make it against four arms above your head when he's 6'3", as opposed to two arms.
Sure, you bet. Okay, that's it for segment number 2. We're going to close this one out. But again, please make sure you like, subscribe, and share the channel. It would mean so much to us to see it grow. We are closing out segment 2. Art Dlugach, Jennifer Fierro, your broad podcaster. Please stay with us for segment number 3, coming right up.